Making headlines for this week of July 22nd. Turkish roulette. Stay with the West, move to the East, or fall into revolution first? These are the questions. Germany under strain. Merkel pushes NATO agenda, but national interest wants separation. Green brick. Development Bank issues first bonds for green projects as example of global change. And Musk's new master plan. After achieving first goal, Elon Musk moves ahead with next plan for humanity and the planet.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. We'll start this week by looking at some of the follow-up events and information related to the alleged failed coup attempt in Turkey. As was reported last week, a lot of confusing information is coming out, not only about the events in Turkey, but also about other events around the world at this time. It is becoming more and more my belief and feeling that this is a plan of information and disinformation to desensitize people to the unfolding global events so people won't overreact as the global changes occur. I will comment more on this in this week's final words. I reported last week the information that was available up to the time of the newscast and offered a perspective as to what those events may be suggesting at that time. The fact that President Erdogan issued an apology to Russia and to President Putin for the shooting down last November of a Russian jet and the killing of its pilot suggested that Turkey was open to making a movement towards the East and joining the growing Eastern alliance of countries in the BRICS alliance, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the growing Eurasian trading bloc known as the New Silk Road. At that same time, however, we see conflicting evidence that Turkey is maintaining its allegiance to supporting Daesh. We see evidence of diplomatic problems between Turkey and the U.S. and possibly also NATO now. Mixed in with this, we see Erdogan mistreating his own people in a crackdown following the failed coup attempt, an attempt that some have speculated was created by Erdogan himself to solidify his power and control in the country. In an article by William F. Engdahl on July 18th in the NEO.org website, Engdahl writes that the coup was a reaction to the recent dramatic geopolitical shift of Erdogan. It was instigated by networks in Turkey loyal to the CIA. It clearly was a desperate move, ill-prepared. This was a network of officers inside the army loyal to Fethullah Gulen movement. Gulen is a 100% CIA-controlled asset. He even lived for many years in exile in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania, and has gotten safe passage and a green card by former top CIA people like Graham Fuller and the former U.S. ambassador to Ankara. Engdahl adds that what is interesting to watch now will be the foreign policy of Erdogan, rapprochement with Russia, reopening talks on the Russia-Turkish Stream gas pipeline to the Greek border, the simultaneous Erdogan rapprochement with Netanyahu, and most critical, Erdogan's apparent agreement, part of Putin's demands for resumption of ties, that Turkey cease efforts to topple Syria's Assad by covertly backing Daesh or other terrorists in Syria and training them in Turkey and selling their oil on the black market. The CIA has egg on its face, and Obama and NATO try to cover it up by their warm embrace of the democratically elected Erdogan. They cared not that in Ukraine, when the CIA ran the Maidan Square coup in February of 2014, that Viktor Yanukovych was the democratically elected president of Ukraine. Look at the mess Washington made there in their effort to provoke a split between Russia and the EU, writes Engdahl. Engdahl makes it clear in his statement that it was Washington that was behind the coup attempt in Turkey in response to Turkey's movement away from Washington's anti-Assad strategy and towards Israel, a country increasingly more in conflict with the U.S. these days, his movement towards Russia, and even Turkey's movement towards supporting Assad in Syria. Engdahl also feels the writing is on the wall for the EU in general, commenting that the top-down, faceless bureaucracy of unelected people who are not accountable to the people. He feels Brexit was the start, but also suggests keeping an eye on Hungary. In his words, perhaps Hungary will be next if the CIA is not able to do a color revolution against Orban before their October referendum to exit the EU. A July 21st article appearing on the geopolitics.co website seems to validate this, writing, Arab media outlets quoted diplomats in Ankara as disclosing that Turkey's President Erdogan was alerted by Russia against an imminent army coup hours before it was initiated on Friday, while a Western media outlet said Erdogan asked his supporters to remain in the streets after receiving advice from Tehran. The unnamed diplomats said the Russian army in the region had intercepted highly sensitive army exchanges and encoded radio messages showing that the Turkish army was readying to stage a coup against the administration in Ankara. The article adds that if these are the real facts on the ground, we can deduce that Erdogan's frustration with NATO might be caused by one or all of the following. The European Union's flip-flopping on significant issues like what to do with refugees now that European countries are shutting down their borders. 2. The supposed $3 billion EU refugee fund that Turkey is asking may not have been delivered, considering the financial turmoil plaguing the Union. 3. Germany's Bundestag made an offensive by recognizing the Armenian genocide, effectively shutting down Turkey's chance for EU membership. The EU Parliament itself is requiring Turkey to recognize the Armenian genocide as one of the preconditions to its EU membership. 4. Erdogan may have felt he's just being used for Syrian oil smuggling by Western interests and the ultimate removal of Syrian President Assad, on top of the countries being utilized as a launching pad for military interventions in the region through U.S. military bases. The conclusion this article makes is the following. Last week's coup in Turkey is now growing into a major regional confrontation over Turkey's shift in its Syria policy now. If confirmed, the Russian and Iranian aid to Erdogan would mean the power balance and equations in the region ought to be redefined. Luella Eleftheriou-Smith, reporting for the London Independent, reported on July 19th that Turkey could fall afoul of NATO's requirement with respect to democracy if it fails to uphold the rule of law in the wake of an attempted coup. This according to U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. The Turkish government's response to the failed coup has alarmed both the U.S. and the EU after it described the plotters as a cancer which had to be cleansed from public institutions. A State Department spokesman has suggested that it is too soon to say if a clampdown by the Erdogan government could jeopardize Turkey's membership in NATO. But NATO's leadership has made it clear that a commitment to uphold democracy, including tolerating diversity, is one of the 5 core requirements for members of the alliance. In what appears to be a validation for what Engdahl reported, that the U.S. was keen to have the world see the U.S. as a friend to Turkey after the failed coup attempt, Secretary of State stated the following.
We stand squarely on the side of the elected leadership in Turkey, which President Obama and I both stated in the course of the events in the early hours as they were unfolding that night. But we also firmly urge the government of Turkey to maintain calm and stability throughout the country. And we also urge the government of Turkey to uphold the highest standards of respect for the nation's democratic institutions and the rule of law.
Once again, we have a Western leader making a claim that another leader adhere to this rule of law. It is hypocritical for any Western leader or representative to make such a statement when all the Western leaders are currently not adhering to the principles of rule of law themselves. For those who did not hear last week's newscast, a link will appear in the show summary for this story to last week's show summary, where the transcript appears for my report on rule of law and also my comments in last week's final word. Marwan Bishara, writing for Al Jazeera on July 12th, has observed that if Turkey leaves NATO, the risks to its security are minimal, but the alliance would suffer if it quits. There are a few other seemingly unusual events that have taken place since the coup that are raising doubts and confusion about what is really going on in the country. Sputnik News reported on July 18th that 2 Turkish pilots who shot down a Russian Su-24 near the Syrian border last November were taken into custody, according to a senior Turkish official speaking on condition of anonymity. Bloomberg reports, citing a high-level Turkish official. It was reported earlier that at least one of the pilots responsible for downing the Russian jet took part in last week's failed Turkish coup attempt. This might suggest that at least one of the pilots had been influenced and possibly even paid off to shoot down the Russian jet, and when that didn't create the result that Washington and CIA wanted, then the pilot was informed to allegedly become part of the coup attempt. This, however, has not been validated. Also on the 18th, RT reported that WikiLeaks reported suffering a sustained attack after it announced the upcoming release of hundreds of thousands of documents relating to Turkish leader Erdogan's Justice and Development Party in the wake of the failed coup. Our infrastructure is under sustained attack, WikiLeaks said on Twitter. We are unsure of the true origin of the attack. The timing suggests a Turkish state power faction or its allies. If the government is trying to show that it is a government of the people and for the people, it appears that they are failing miserably. RT reported in the same article that more than 7,500 suspects had been detained in connection with the coup attempt. Prime Minister Binali Yildirim said on Monday. In addition, some 8,000 police officers had been removed from their posts, a senior security official told Reuters. At the same time, Turkish authorities promptly suspended some 3,000 judges and prosecutors, arresting at least 775 of them. Johannes Hahn, the EU commissioner dealing with Turkey's EU membership bid, said the alacrity with which judges were rounded up after the failed coup indicates that the government had actually prepared a list in advance. This would, it seemed, add fuel to the fire that Erdogan was planning something on his own. As well this week, it is being reported that over 20,000 teachers at state institutions had been fired. The London Daily Telegraph reported 21,000, and other sources were reporting more. As well, the CBC was reported on July 20th, saying that Turkey had declared a 3-month state of emergency, perhaps to deal with popular anger and revolt at the actions of the government. Ironically, in the same CBC article, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also called for Turkey to respect the rule of law, something of which he himself is guilty of not respecting. What are the people of the world being prepared for remains to be seen. What is clear is that something significant is happening, and all forces, both positive and negative at this time, are trying to counteract each other in the race to either maintain control of the planet or to liberate the planet from forces that have enslaved humanity and destroyed the planet for profit, power, and greed. In other geopolitical news, the confusion of which side a leader and country is on is also becoming apparent in Germany. On one side, it seems Chancellor Angela Merkel and her immediate supporters want to support the war rhetoric of NATO and also strengthening their own military. Tom Batchelor reported for the London Independent in May that Merkel announced plans to have the first expansion of the German army in 25 years. This, however, appears to be in conflict with the plans of the EU to have its own super-state army instead of national military units. This comes amidst calls within the country for its own nationwide referendum on whether the country should remain within the EU. There are also reports suggesting that German industries have already begun ignoring the U.S.-imposed sanctions on Russia because the sanctions hurt German businesses and the country more than they hurt the U.S. Rebecca Paring, in a separate article for the London Express on July 3rd, reported that a beleaguered Angela Merkel is facing calls for a referendum to free German people of EU slavery in the wake of Britain's sensational decision to cut ties with Brussels. Several parties have begun declaring that a German referendum will be part of their party platform going into a national election in Germany in autumn of 2017. One of the more outspoken party leaders in the German Bundestag is Sarah Wagenknecht of the Left Party. In an article appearing on an English-language news website from Macedonia on July 12th, it reports the following. You won't see this reported on CNN. A German MP has blasted the United States as the most dangerous country in the world and certainly the biggest danger to European peace. Wagenknecht was quoted as saying, the Americans are placing nukes in Germany, supposedly to counter Putin's aggression in the Baltics. Do the Americans seriously expect us to believe in such stupidity? One of the great politicians, Mr. George Kennan, described NATO's perpetual encircling of Russia as a fatal mistake, and he said this in the late 1990s. NATO has continued to expand since then. Surrounding Russia with NATO troops will not bring peace, rather just the opposite. NATO's large numbers, primarily from the US, UK, and France, love to speak of Article 5, yet they are ignoring Article 1, which very clearly states NATO is not an offensive alliance and should not engage anyone militarily. It's quite clear the U.S. is breaking Article 1 and international law daily with its countless wars of aggression. It's become quite clear the entire Middle East fiasco is observed only from one angle, and as the alliance sees fit. The article adds that there is a great deal of disturbance among the German public as the U.S. continues to pile on soldiers and weapons, not just in Germany, but across the European continent. Germans are fed up with both Angela Merkel, who is claimed to be a CIA agent, as well as the U.S. The popular opinion seems to support this. An RT article from June 12th reported the following. Only 9% of Germans support NATO's buildup in Eastern Europe, according to a YouGov poll. 2/3 also agreed with Germany's foreign minister, who recently said the military alliance should abandon its saber rattling at Russia's doorstep. From the NATO summit held earlier in June in Warsaw, NATO gave the green light to the deployment of a 4,000-strong force in the Baltic countries and Poland, in addition to the more than 1,000 troops already stationed there on a rotational basis. It seems that there is a major difference of opinion between Chancellor Merkel and her foreign minister, and in this case, the foreign minister has the support of over 64% of the German people. Other countries are also beginning to speak out on U.S. hegemonic control. An article by Alexander Mercouri, appearing on the makewarhistory.co.uk website, writes that the French, Italian, Bulgarian, and Greek leaderships have all distanced themselves from the rhetoric coming out of the NATO summit in Warsaw, with all of them saying that they consider Russia a partner rather than an enemy. Germany appears split, with Merkel predictably taking a hard line, but her SPD and CSU coalition partners making it quite clear that they disagree with her. The article then closes with the following. It is striking that in two leading NATO states, Germany and Britain, calls for dialogue with Russia and a halt to further NATO expansion are now being made, and that these are being justified with the same reasons. The debate within NATO is not ended, but the neocon agenda of perpetual NATO expansion and confrontation with Russia is now finally being challenged, though very late in the day, from within the heart of the NATO elite. It seems that regardless of the outcome of the election in the U.S. in November, the high tide of NATO expansion may be over. Irish journalist Brian MacDonald, in an article appearing on RT on July 14th, added this to the discussion. According to statements made at last weekend's summit in Warsaw, NATO regards Russia as a bigger threat than ISIS, or Daesh. Of course, that's ludicrous, but when you scratch beneath the surface, the use of these falsehoods makes perverted sense. MacDonald later states his belief that it's plainly obvious the biggest threat to Western Europe is Islamic fundamentalism and the fallout from a destabilized Middle East. At this point, it is unclear whether MacDonald knows that Daesh, or ISIL, or ISIS, is not an Islamic or Muslim fundamentalism. In other words, that Daesh has been funded, trained, and supported by U.S. interests and other countries as well. A question came up in the article as to why NATO would choose Russia as a target at this time instead of Daesh, and MacDonald refers or offers his interpretation that the main reason is because there is very little profit in combating the self-styled Islamic State or Daesh, and NATO is primarily a money racket which provides a lot of influential people with very comfortable lifestyles and jobs flying around the globe on private jets and generating well-paid jobs, both directly and via the think tank circuit. Let's be clear here, writes MacDonald. You don't require submarines or nuclear weapons to engage Daesh, but you would in a larger conflict with Russia. The fact that such a collision would probably, due to the atomic arsenals involved, mean the end of human civilization is irrelevant to NATO because it doesn't actually want a war with Russia. Instead, it desires to use Moscow as a convenient boogeyman in order to maintain U.S. defense spending, which grew 9% annually from 2000 to 2009 during its war of terror. Fighting Daesh doesn't require expensive hardware. Instead, it needs boots on the ground, which are politically costly but financially cheap. By contrast, squaring off against Moscow is like a comfort blanket, familiar to the masses, very unlikely to lead to actual war, but extremely lucrative. So it seems every country in its own way is somehow contributing to the mixed messages going out to the people of the world. Is this country for global peace and change, or is it not? How is it possible to tell when information coming out could lead one to argue both sides? This is the challenge, and it is also the reason why people may wish to choose not to get caught up in what they are seeing and hearing about global events from the media, including my own newscast. If one can stay in the position of being a more neutral observer without getting emotionally charged about a country doing this or doing that or whatever, then those energies can be focused more on positive change within oneself, because one is no longer allowing oneself to be guided by the fear and negativity that the global cabal requires one to feel in order for them to keep their power. Until we know more in the bigger picture, stay neutral and stay the observer. Besides, it will be better on your personal health anyway. Taking a look at a few geopolitical quick headlines for the week. Rebellion against the EU seems to be continuing on multiple fronts. Nick Guthridge, in an article on July 16th, reported that Brussels is facing another crunch referendum after a major Irish trade union demanded a public vote on a controversial trade deal with America. In another body blow to the EU project, the powerful Unite Union is calling for a full referendum on whether to implement the highly contentious Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP. The hugely controversial deal being cooked up in secret between Brussels and the U.S. has been met with serious opposition over fears it will allow American corporations to break up public services. And top lawyers in Ireland are already at work forming a case that the TTIP deal is so wide-ranging and intrusive that it should automatically trigger a referendum under the country's constitution. The EU is perceived to be weaker at this time, and according to the article, one of the larger unions in Ireland, Unite, which has 100,000 Irish members and many more in the rest of the British Isles, is calling for the TTIP deal to be put to the public vote in the same way. Spokesman Michael Taft said, Unite believes that the implications of TTIP are so far-reaching that it must be put to a referendum. The most controversial aspect of the proposed free trade agreement is the establishment of an international court to settle disputes between companies and countries. TTIP contains provisions whereby U.S. corporations can seek compensation if European governments take any actions which impact upon their ability, the U.S. corporation's ability, to carry out business. Crossing over the channel into Scotland now, and Scottish National Party, the SNP, appears to have a bit of egg on its face in the fallout from the Brexit vote. The leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon, has been a strong supporter of the EU and has stated her party's desire to remain within the EU, even if it means having another referendum to separate from the UK. It appears, however, that voters in Scotland who are members of the SNP do not support that view. According to Tom Parfitt of the London Express on June 29th, statistics, which will embarrass the party leader, show that the SNP is actually Scotland's most Eurosceptic party, with 29% of the voters having supported the Brexit vote to leave. Sturgeon now risks angering her own supporters if she attempts to block Brexit or continues calling for a fresh referendum on Scottish independence. The revelation comes after the First Minister warned the Scottish Parliament could veto Britain's decision to quit the bloc. It might seem that the Scottish people are paying attention to what is happening in other countries, and they are no longer seeing any benefits to remaining within the EU when so many others are apparently wanting to get out. In financial news, we look at a tale of two financial paradigms. One is just being born and is showing great promise of serving many while also being able to defeat and transform a dysfunctional and otherwise dead paradigm that is exclusively self-serving. The new paradigm is rising up in the Asian countries and also within the BRICS alliance of countries. The old dying paradigm is represented by the fiat system of debt enslavement, still being held on to by the Western countries led by the United States. We begin first by looking at one story from the old paradigm, followed by a story relating to a transition from the old to the new, and then a third story setting an example within the new paradigm. It is not much of a secret in the circles of those who have been following the collapse, or rather the transformation of the old financial paradigm to a new paradigm based on greater equity and integrity for all. For those who choose not to be aware of it, or to just simply ignore it, the reality of this information is likely to cause a great amount of discomfort and perhaps even fear. The signs are becoming abundantly clear, even within the mainstream media, although, again, the information is not communicated to people within the US and Canada especially. An article appearing on the London Daily Mail website on July 8th has reported on the condition of a dysfunctional and very broken European Union and its relation with the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. According to the article, a devastating report published reveals why the decision of the British people to unshackle themselves from the crumbling European Union was so right. In clear and simple language, it portrays the EU as an organization in profound crisis, with declining growth, a tottering banking system, mass unemployment, alarming levels of debt, and deep-rooted structural weaknesses. The closing comment of this report was as follows: without decisive action, the euro area will remain vulnerable to instability and repeated crises of confidence. The article continues, so who produced this chilling analysis? Some Eurosceptic think tank perhaps, or a hyperbolic leave campaigner, referring to someone wanting to leave in a Brexit vote. No, it was none other than the International Monetary Fund, one of the world's most powerful global financial institutions. As the Mail has consistently argued, there was more danger staying in a broken, sclerotic, economically dying union than in facing the challenges of forging new trade links with economies that are booming in the world. Others feel the same way. According to the article, in a new book, Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz declares that the single currency has had a crushing effect on the populations of Southern Europe and is so deeply flawed, it may have to be abandoned. Adopting the euro in 1992 was a fatal decision, he argues. Instead of bringing prosperity and solidarity, it now threatens to tear the continent apart. Also, in its latest global strategy report, French bank Société Générale carries a piece by one of its top analysts who says, I believe it is only a matter of time before the Eurozone project fractures. He points out that Italy's banking system is already on the verge of collapse. What is not being reported since the Brexit vote is that the UK pound, although it has fallen a bit, is still not bad news because it makes UK products and services more attractive while encouraging tourism. As well, the London stock market has rebounded to become stronger than it was before the Brexit vote. The article then asks, why do we never hear of these positive developments from the political and economic establishment, nearly all of whom backed the Remain vote and are now trying to outdo each other in painting an apocalyptic vision of Britain's future? Just as mentioned earlier about the definition of peace that one is using to define the world, it can also be said with the economy. As long as one's livelihood is dependent upon a debt-based fiat currency economic model for one's wealth, power, reputation, and control, there is no amount of understanding that will help him or her to speak positively about a system that will not benefit them and their egos. Laura Mowat, writing for the London Express on July 11th, wrote that IMF officials were quoted as saying that the euro area is at a critical juncture. Muddling through is becoming increasingly untenable. Unless collective problems are solved, the euro area is likely to suffer repeated bouts of economic and political stability, leading to crises of confidence and economic setbacks. The article notes several other countries where officials and or politicians have begun calling for their own referenda to leave the European Union. These include, but are not limited to, France, the Netherlands, Austria, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Hungary, Italy, and in Poland, calls have been made for a new treaty. All of this represents a big blow to the NATO alliance, as it desperately tries to maintain its power image and its influence over a fracturing Europe. However, the end of our current financial paradigm has begun, and for many awakened people, including myself, it is a very welcome sight to behold. Even though the withdrawal from this old addiction could be painful, it is absolutely necessary if our world is to evolve to something infinitely better than what we have been enslaved to. Don Pittis, writing for CBC News in Canada on July 18th, observed the following. The world's central bankers may have started a revolution more radical than anything ever dreamed of by Karl Marx, and it's far from clear where it will all end. By repeatedly cutting interest rates and buying up bonds, the world's central banks have been gnawing at one of the founding pillars of capitalism, and so far, warnings have fallen on deaf ears. Effectively, central banks are changing the meaning of money, and by doing so, they are taking us into an unknown and potentially destabilized future. Pittis continues, the worry expressed by many smart people, including Robert Gordon, author of The Rise and Fall of American Growth, is that real growth has almost stopped. It's been replaced by pretend growth in the form of government fiscal and monetary stimulus. We must not assume an easy return to the long-lost era of dynamism, Financial Times associate editor Martin Wolf wrote last week in an article with the bleak title, An End to Facile Optimism About the Future. Paul Mason, in his article for the London Guardian on July 17th from 2015, wastes no words in his title, writing, The End of Capitalism Has Begun. In the article, he writes the following, without us noticing, we are entering the post-capitalist era. At the heart of further change to come is information technology, new ways of working, and the sharing economy. The old ways will take a long while to disappear, but it's time to be utopian. He also continues with this. As with the end of feudalism 500 years ago, capitalism's replacement by post-capitalism will be accelerated by external shocks and shaped by the emergence of a new kind of human being. And it has started. Post-capitalism is possible because of three major changes information technology has brought about in the past 25 years. First, it has reduced the need for work, blurred the edges between work and free time, and loosened the relationship between work and wages. The coming wave of automation, currently stalled because our social infrastructure cannot bear the consequences, will hugely diminish the amount of work needed, not just to subsist, but to provide a decent life for all. Second, information is corroding the market's ability to form prices correctly. That is because markets are based on scarcity, while information is abundant. The system's defense mechanism is to form monopolies, the giant tech companies, on a scale not seen in the past 200 years. Yet, they cannot last. By building business models and share valuations based on the capture and privatization of all socially produced information, such firms are constructing a fragile corporate edifice at odds with the most basic need of humanity, which is to use ideas freely. Third, we're seeing the spontaneous rise of collaborative production. Goods, services, and organizations are appearing that no longer respond to the dictates of the market and the managerial hierarchy. The biggest information product in the world, Wikipedia, is made by volunteers for free, abolishing the encyclopedia business and depriving the advertising industry of an estimated $3 billion a year in revenue. Almost unnoticed in the niches and hollows of the market system, whole swaths of economic life are beginning to move to a different rhythm. Parallel currencies, time banks, cooperatives, and self-managed spaces have proliferated, barely noticed by the economic profession, and often as a direct result of the shattering of the old structures of the post-2008 crisis. Perhaps without saying it directly, Mason appears to acknowledge that the way people are changing the world is not by trying to find a way to profit from their product or service that benefits only them, but instead they are choosing willingly to open source their product or service and make it free to the world so that people will take the idea and use it. Better still, they will take the idea and improve it and make it even better. In this way, a model that is focused on helping others instead of only helping oneself begins to unfold in the consciousness of humanity around our planet, and it is this consciousness that is contributing to the destruction of the paradigm that the establishment seeks to keep humanity enslaved to. Over to Japan, and Japan has long been considered an ally of the U.S., as have many countries, but in the past year or so, and especially since the official launch of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in China, many countries have begun turning their back on their allegiance to the U.S., causing the U.S. to become increasingly more isolated and, in some cases, increasingly more desperate, as far as the cabal power brokers in Washington are concerned. An article has appeared on the Investment Research Dynamics website on July 20th, and the article suggests that Japan is signaling the end game for the U.S. According to the article, Japan announced last week that its TOCOM commodity exchange, that is Japan's less corrupted CME equivalent, would begin trading in physical gold, like the Shanghai Gold Exchange, on July 25th, under the name TOCOM Physical Gold. It also announced that it would be introducing a delivery at settlement option for its current month gold futures contract. That is, TOCOM gold futures buyers will now have the ability to take delivery of physical gold via TOCOM's paper gold. The news of this event was largely muted in the Western financial media, and even the alternative media blogosphere largely seems to have overlooked the news release. But this is a highly significant development because it signals a subtle shift in Japan's economic and monetary focus from the West to the East. It will also create a big upward price readjustment in gold and silver. The significance of Japan's TOCOM exchange shifting from all fiat paper contracts to a physical gold trading and settlement operation is reinforced by the fact that 2 days ahead of the announcement, it was reported that Tanaka Kikinzoku Group, Japan's leading precious metals trader, refiner, and manufacturer, acquired Swiss-based Metalor Group, one of the world's largest refiners and suppliers of precious metals-related products. This announcement further validates 2 points. One is that the Asian countries are moving or have already moved to a financial paradigm where currencies are backed by something of value, in this case gold. The second, according to the article, is this. Now that Asia and Russia are no longer funding the U.S. Treasury debt printing press, the Fed will be forced to begin hyperinflating the money supply to keep the government funded. The article notes Japan as having been moving quietly towards greater economic integration with China for the last couple of years. The article adds that this abrupt transition into the physical precious metals market signals Japan's move to integrate its financial markets and economic system into the developing Eastern Bloc monetary system, which appears as if it might already be seated in gold. It likely signals the end game for the United States. Is Canada aware of this news? Well, those in the know would have to be, and maybe one bank is trying to capitalize on this before news finally hits North America. Pete Evans, reporting for the CBC in Canada on July 20th, wrote that the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce has become the first Canadian bank to sell bonds with a negative yield, and it had no problem selling the debt, even though buyers are guaranteed to lose money if the debt is held to maturity. The trick here is to try to understand why someone would buy something that is guaranteed to fail over the long term. What we have learned about the U.S. system is this. For decades, while the fiat currency system has been in place, there has also been a secret fund that was started after all the gold and wealth was confiscated around the time of the Great Depression. This fund was later found out to be called the Emergency Stabilization Fund. As China, Russia, and other countries started selling off massive amounts of U.S. debt bonds, this ESF was alleged to have been used to buy up all that debt in order to keep the international U.S. dollar looking strong and healthy in the eyes of the world. What it also did, however, was hyperinflate the national U.S. dollar at home. This might suggest, if the same logic applies, that there may also be some kind of secret fund in place somewhere in Canada that can be tapped for selling off debt that is going to hurt a bank more. This has not been validated, so I cannot say if it is true at this point. An article from last February by John Heinzel of the Globe and Mail looks at who might buy a negative bond. Heinzel writes, "It seems like a bad deal, all right. You lend me $100, and after a fixed period, I agree to give you back $99, for example. Normally, people would want to get paid to lend out money. They don't want to have to pay the borrower. But this upside-down arrangement isn't exactly what's happening in the European countries, including Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, Austria, Switzerland, and Sweden, where yields on government bonds with terms of up to 5 years, and in some cases longer, have gone negative. Even some highly rated corporate bonds, including those from BP and Nestle, are trading at a negative yield. There are several possible reasons an investor would buy a negative interest bond, the TD economist explained. Risk-averse investors might accept a negative yield as a sort of insurance premium to keep their money in a relatively safe and liquid debt instrument as opposed to a shaky bank. In a deflationary environment, the real or inflation-adjusted return on a bond with negative nominal interest could still be positive. For example, if a bond is yielding negative 1%, but the consumer price index falls by 2%, the investor's purchasing power would still increase. If yields fall further into negative territory, the investor could make a capital gain because the price of the bond, which moves in the opposite direction to the yield, would rise. The investor might be speculating that the currency in which the bond is denominated will rise. The buyer of the bond could be an insurance company or pension fund that is required to purchase certain types of relatively safe assets, regardless of their yield. The complex financial tools that were created to keep the everyday person unaware and enslaved is very similar to the system of language that is used within commercial admiralty courtrooms and law offices. The tools and language were specifically created to allow only the informed players who really understand the game to benefit from it. To put it another way, it might loosely be compared with being an elite poker player being invited into a back room to play the same game others are playing in the casino, but the ante, the wins, and the losses are much higher. In the show summary, there will also be a link to another article from The Economist explaining the kinds of people who would buy negative yield bonds. The new human and planetary consciousness is about putting the needs of many ahead of the needs of the few, or the one, as Commander Spock was quoted as saying in the second Star Trek movie just before dying. Looking to Asia to get an idea of an example where banking can be used to help humanity and the planet, it has been reported in the BRICS Post website on July 19th that the new development bank launched by the BRICS countries has issued its first bonds worldwide to raise funds for clean energy projects in member states. The new lender sold 3 billion yuan, or about $450 million of yuan-denominated green bonds in China's interbank market on Monday. The green bonds were issued with a 5-year tenor and are the first such issuance by a bank of its type under guidelines issued by China's central bank in December. It was the first time in 7 years that a global financial institution has issued yuan-denominated bonds in China. What is also important to note is the interest that there appears to be in the bonds. The article continues. The bonds attracted investors from home and abroad. At its roadshow last Tuesday, more than 40 domestic and overseas institutional investors subscribed to the bonds. NDB President Kundapurt Vamankamma said the issuance was a milestone for the Multilateral Development Bank. It will help boost sustainable development and serve as a signal of support for capital markets in BRICS countries, Kamap said. Kamap also said the bank will support more clean and renewable energy use to reduce carbon emissions. Another important sign resulting from the interest shown in the bonds is the confidence global markets are showing in the Chinese currency. The article notes that issuance of the yuan-denominated bonds shows the confidence international financial institutions have in the Chinese currency and could promote the internationalization of the yuan, said Chen Ziqing, governor of the Bank of China. According to plans laid out by the new development bank, the bank will issue another 10 billion yuan in China over the coming 6 months. As well, the bank has also indicated plans to sell bonds in both Russia and India to fund green projects there. Earlier this year, perhaps in a hint of what was to come, Russian Finance Minister Anton Siluanov was quoted as saying that the NDB will soon become a strong and well-respected international financial institution, playing a leading role in the changing international financial architecture. In a related side note, a message was sent to me yesterday by a friend in Sweden. This friend has another friend, Swedish friend, who owns a company in Estonia and therefore has a company account at a bank in that country. His friend received a letter from the Estonian bank recently stating the following. We hereby inform you that we will, from today, not handle any international transactions in U.S. dollars. All other currency transactions are okay. As I do not have any more information, it is hard to speculate on the context of why this choice was made by the Estonian bank. However, it is interesting that this choice has been announced by the Estonian bank for at least 2 reasons. One is that it appears to show that the U.S. dollar is being isolated as a global currency, and it would suggest that the power the U.S. dollar once had is no longer there. A second reason that is of interest is in view of the recent NATO decision to put more troops in the Baltics, where Estonia happens to be located. It brings into question now the reason why troops are being put there, to hold off an alleged threat of aggression from Russia, or perhaps now to have troops deal with a growing resistance to U.S. hegemony and the U.S. dollar in that region. If European listeners receive information of this nature from their banks, please feel free to contact me to let me know. I can be contacted through the CVN homepage, cosmicvisionnews.com. So the Western world banking system, which continues to try cheating people even into its dying days, is being replaced by new banks that are seeking to raise funds to help create projects that help our planet and ultimately to help ensure humanity's survival upon the planet. As the energies continue to rise, humanity is being called at this time to demonstrate greater compassion and service to others, and it is this consciousness that is manifesting and will continue to manifest across the world, hopefully ending once and for all the power and control of selfish and greedy bankers and individuals who have little compassion nor foresight for a positive future. Also in financial news are the following headlines. RTE News in Ireland has reported on a Reuters News Service article on July 20th that a senior HSBC manager has been arrested and charged alongside a former foreign exchange executive with engaging in a scheme to front-run a $3.5 billion transaction by one of the bank's clients, U.S. prosecutors said. Mark Johnson, HSBC's global head of foreign exchange cash trading in London, and Stuart Scott, its ex-head of cash trading for Europe, the Middle East and Africa, were charged in a criminal complaint filed in federal court in Brooklyn, New York. Prosecutors said the executives, who are both British citizens, misused information provided to them by a client that had hired HSBC to convert $3.5 billion to British pounds in connection with a planned sale of one of the unnamed company's subsidiaries. The charges came a day after the Federal Reserve Board said it was banning Matthew Gardner, a former foreign exchange trader at Barclays and at UBS, from participating in the banking industry for manipulating pricing benchmarks. This could be a significant event, as it may show that public arrests of bankers are now underway with regard to the international fiat currency scam that has been perpetuated against humanity. Hopefully, more arrests will be reported over the coming days and weeks. Problems in the EU are extending beyond their borders to Canada. Nick Gutteridge, writing for the London Express on July 19th, reported that the European Union's flagship trade deal with Canada was on the brink of collapse after a German political party sued Brussels over its implementation. The center-left Die Linke has launched legal action to block the controversial Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, PACT, saying it is constitutional, or rather unconstitutional, under German law. The party's attempt to torpedo the hated deal is just the latest in a series of devastating trade blows for the European Union, which is unraveling following the Brexit vote. The article added that there is a very real prospect that the CETA deal will be torpedoed before it even has left port, in a development which will throw the future of a much bigger deal with America into serious doubt. Britain will not be affected by either calamity after voting to leave the EU and is now free to begin informal talks on sealing its own trade deals with Canada, the US, and the rest of the world. In fact, according to another article by Marco Giangeli of the London Express on July 18th, Britain already has 10 trade deals lined up with economic powerhouses around the world as it forges its post-Brexit future, Liam Fox said. The new Secretary of State for International Trade has been tasked with negotiating the global trade deal that will make Britain a beacon of open trade around the world. Among the list of countries informally confirming their interest in doing trade deals with the UK include India, China, Australia, Japan, and Canada. Rebecca Perring, in another London Express article on the 19th, has noted that the EU leadership may now be trying to steal trade deals from the UK. According to her article, calculating Brussels bureaucrats have attempted to beat Britain to trade deals after launching talks with Indonesia, the biggest economy in the regional trading bloc, seemingly keen to take advantage of the fact that the UK is barred from striking individual trade deals until it officially leaves the EU. The bloc is plowing ahead to secure a pact with Asian powers, including Singapore and Vietnam. Breaking away from Brussels following June's Brexit referendum is set to be a lengthy and complicated process which could take up to 2 years once Article 50, the formal process for breaking away, is triggered. Aware of this, the growth-hungry bloc, the EU, pressed ahead for improved economic ties with Asian countries by launching negotiations for an EU-Indonesia free trade agreement on Monday. Now that the precedent has been set, and other countries can now see that Britain does not appear to be suffering significantly as a result of the vote, this may encourage other countries to push for their own break from EU control. In general news, a Euronews article by Everton Gale on July 22nd has reported that after searching for more than 2 years, the hunt for Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 is likely to be suspended if the plane is not found in the current search area, say the transport ministers of Malaysia, China, and Australia. The search has been concentrating on a 120,000 square kilometer corridor in the South Indian Ocean. Only 10,000 square kilometers remain. Once this is completed, the hunt will be suspended. The plane disappeared while en route to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur in March of 2014. The article has reported that only a few pieces of debris, allegedly coming from the aircraft, have been found on a Mozambique beach and on the island of La Réunion. This is very odd. The day before, Simon Osborne, writing for the London Express, reported that the pilots of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 may have been in control of the doomed passenger jet in its final moments and glided gently into the sea, according to a new theory from salvage experts. It seems that sources may be trying to cover up the fact that there was no debris after all, and then this would demand an explanation from officials who allegedly verified that the 4 pieces of plane found in Mozambique and La Réunion were in fact a part of Malaysian Airlines 370. There are also several other questions and concerns relating to this story. 2 weeks after Flight 370 was alleged to have crashed or disappeared, reports began to surface, including photos of a Malaysian airliner being stored in a hangar in Tel Aviv, Israel. Whether it was the same aircraft was not confirmed. However, on July 17th, a few months later, another Malaysian airliner would go down, this time over the eastern Ukraine region of Donetsk. What is suspicious about this is that according to a BBC article attempting to explain what they knew about the event, the plane was able to safely fly over the U.S. Kiev-controlled part of Ukraine and across the entire country before being shot down in the part of Ukraine that the West was claiming was controlled or invaded by Russia. This, of course, fueled much of the Western rhetoric that has led to sanctions being imposed upon Russia and the demonization of Russia within the Western media. There are a few problems with this. Will Robinson, in a London Daily Mail article on July 14th of 2014, reporting on the crash, wrote the following. The rebel commander blamed for shooting down Flight 17 has made bizarre claims that the bodies on the plane were not fresh. Pro-Russian separatist Igor Girkin has claimed corpses near the debris died days before the plane took off. According to rebel website Russkaya Vesna, the leader was told by people at the scene in eastern Ukraine that a significant number of the bodies were drained of blood and reeked of decomposition. This opened up a whole new theory that Flight 17 was in fact the original Flight 370 and had somehow been transported to Amsterdam. The question now may be, why would Flight 370 be renamed to Flight 17, and how could it ever have taken off if the bodies were all dead and decomposed? An article on nodesinfo.com from July 20th of 2014, 2 days after the shooting down of Flight 17, this site reported that there were no grieving relatives at the airport, even though there were allegedly 192 Dutch citizens on board. The article shows a customs agent apparently lying about the details and that CNN was helping to fabricate those lies. The article adds the following, however. The Netherlands is a hotbed for Mossad activity, including the creation of forged documents. Security at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam is under Mossad Shin Bet control. A Japanese journalist, the only non-European journalist to cover the crash of Israel's El Al jet in Amsterdam back in October of 1992, was able to learn more about Amsterdam and its operations. In an article posted on the Able Danger website on July 20th, 2014, he wrote the following: I uncovered the sordid facts of how the official investigation back then was undone by a large network of Israeli intelligence agents who paid hush money to victims' families, pressured injured firefighters from filing lawsuits over radiation exposure, and suppressed data from the hangar where the wreckage was stored. The crippled El Al cargo jet, leased from UPS, had transported from JFK Airport in New York a secret load of weapons, including plutonium, depleted uranium, and a bioweapon called mycoplasm in its cargo bay before crashing on an attempt to return to Schiphol Airport in an operation directed by the Israeli Intelligence Service instead of Dutch flight officials. Once again, this time in the destruction of Flight 17, there is an Israeli-connected air crash with political ramifications involving Israeli strategic interests. Inside Israel, exactly when its military launches an invasion of Gaza, and in troubled Ukraine, a supplier of military electronics to the Israeli Defense Force. Security at Schiphol Airport is operated by ICTF, an Israeli-owned airport security company based in the Netherlands, founded by former officers of the Shin Bet intelligence agency. Its subsidiaries, including ProCheck, Ramaso, and ISEC, are also involved in key security functions there. The Israeli security company has a record of staging false flag operations, including the September 11, 2001 attacks in New York. ICTF subsidiary Huntley provided passenger and baggage inspection services at Boston Logan Airport, where 2 of the 4 jetliners used in the 9/11 attack originated. This may explain why a Malaysian jet was kept in a hangar in Israel. There is another concern also. According to the UkraineWar.info news website, a Ukraine soldier has admitted that his crew operated the BUK missile installation that shot down the jet, and that they laughed when the media tried to blame rebels and the Russians. So all of this begins to raise legitimate questions, returning to the original story about Flight 370, about the taxpayer costs that have been wasted over 2 years, pretending to tell one story when a much deeper and darker story has been playing out on numerous levels. To blame Russia, to help destabilize Ukraine, and to generally keep the war and fear-mongering alive. How far down the rabbit hole does one want to go with this story? G.H. Eliasson, writing for UkraineWar.info, discovered that the U.S. had officially recognized the right of the Donbass region in Ukraine to ascend into the Fraternity of Nations. Eliasson reports that Obama has done this every year, yet he does not recognize Putin's recognition of the same region to exist on its own. According to Eliasson, the Captive Nations Week resolution, passed by both the Senate and House of Representatives in 1959 and reissued as a presidential proclamation every year for the last 56 years, and this is also known as Public Law 86-90, affirms the recognition of the Don, also known as the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, as being the core entities of a region formerly known as Kosakia, as well as a future Zaporozhian Republic, currently the Zaporozhia Oblast. Kosakia is the American geopolitical term describing the regions where Cossacks lived in the former USSR and Russia. This proclamation is still current U.S. law and tradition. He adds the following: the United States of America was first to recognize independent Donbass Republic's independence. Ukraine and Kosakia, the Donbass and Zaporozhia, are listed in the proclamation as separate countries and separate peoples. Both have equal status under U.S. law as having a right to exist. Both nations were preemptively recognized by the United States in 1959. This would seem to affirm, therefore, the U.S. involvement in setting up the revolution in Maidan Square in Kiev in early 2014, since they had already acknowledged the independence of the Donbass Republic. As said, they did not expect the republics to want to go to Russia, so the question may be asked, why would they recognize this independence but not with Russia. Shortly after the shooting down of MH17, Joyce Nelson reported for The Ecologist website on September 11, 2014, that a little-known aspect of the crisis in Ukraine is receiving some international attention. The California-based Oakland Institute recently released a report revealing that the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, under terms of their $17 billion loan to Ukraine, would open that country to genetically modified crops and genetically modified organisms in agriculture. The country that would stand to benefit from this is, of course, Monsanto, from an announcement they made in 2013 stating a desire to get control of Europe's most fertile agricultural land. This may be one reason for the U.S. to do this. Another reason may be linked to the fact that the Jewish Khazarian. This is one reason. Another reason links to the historical territory of Khazaria, where the Khazarian Jewish bloodline originally existed. According to a map of Khazaria, the territory included all of the Ukraine east of the capital Kiev, including Crimea, as well as parts of Russia and Kazakhstan around the northern shore of the Caspian Sea. Although the U.S. recognizes the Donbass region, they are allowing the killing of those people because they would rather align with Russia instead of the West. The propaganda campaign being orchestrated by Kiev and NATO appears to be failing also. According to Eliasson, the propaganda the Ukrainian government has been filling the airwaves with is failing. The Ukrainian info war, with NATO's help, is failing on the home front no matter how well it plays in the West. Nedelia UA recently did a poll asking Ukrainians which leader they would trust to lead the country. Even though the Ukrainians are constantly barraged with a Russian invasion, it is President Vladimir Putin of Russia who led the poll with 84% of the vote. The highest-ranked Ukrainian in the poll of who Ukrainians would want to lead their own country was President Poroshenko, and he only received 1%. As I've been trying to tell people, one can no longer look to a single story for an understanding of what is really going on. There are connections within connections within connections. Governments pretend to support or allow one thing, but then it is revealed that there is something else going on in another case. Never take a story as truth from its face value. Ask questions and dig more deeply. Greater truths are being made known now, and it is leading to the fundamental and profound shift that is currently underway on our planet. Over to science and tech-related news now. When one considers how big oil and various automakers conspired to kill the electric car several decades ago, it helps to explain why so many who have great ideas and plans to help humanity and the planet are not so open about sharing their plans. They could become ultra-rich by selling out their plans, and many have chosen to do so. For those, however, who are stronger in their morals and ethics, the risk of not selling out can lead to threats, or even worse, death. This kind of power, however, seems to be disappearing as more and more people courageously come forward to share what they know. Even some among these people are willing to make their information available free of charge to the people of the world because they are motivated by a higher goal of changing the planet more quickly, rather than just seeking to get rich and use that money to continue living in an enslaved and controlled world. Elon Musk appears to be one such individual. The founder of the Tesla car company and the CEO of SpaceX and the visionary behind the Hyperloop technology decided in 2013 to release the patent for his Hyperloop technology and the rest of his technology and make them open source to the people of the world. Less than a year later, in June 14th, he did the same thing for his cars. In fact, on the same day in June, Musk wrote the following on the company website. There was a wall of Tesla patents in the lobby of our Palo Alto headquarters. That is no longer the case. They have been removed. In the spirit of the open source movement for the advancement of electric vehicle technology. Tesla Motors was created to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport. If we clear a path to the creation of compelling electric vehicles, but then lay intellectual property landmines behind us to inhibit others, we are acting in a manner contrary to that goal. Tesla will not initiate patent lawsuits against anyone who, in good faith, wants to use our technology. Given that annual new vehicle production is approaching 100 million per year and the global fleet is approximately 2 billion cars, it is impossible for Tesla to build electric cars fast enough to address the carbon crisis. By the same token, it means the market is enormous. Our true competition is not the small trickle of non-Tesla cars being produced, but rather the enormous flood of gasoline cars pouring out of the world's factories every day. We believe that Tesla, other countries making electric cars, and the world would all benefit from a common, rapidly evolving technology platform. Technology leadership is not defined by patents, which history has repeatedly shown to be small protection indeed against a determined competitor, but rather by the ability of a company to attract and motivate the world's most trained and most talented engineers. We believe that applying the open source philosophy to our patents will strengthen rather than diminish Tesla's position in this regard. It has also been reported that Tesla is already planning a 2.0 version of its Powerwall, its wall-mounted energy source for homes. An article that appeared on the Minds.com website on May 30th shares a video of an individual showing people how to create their own Tesla Powerwall for about $300, it is claimed. For individuals who have knowledge of electricity and are looking to teach others, or perhaps earn a little money on the side, this information may be meaningful for you. Elon Musk, however, appears to have even bigger plans for the future. According to Matt Kim on July 10th, writing for the Inverse.com website, Kim reports that Elon Musk tweeted out a cryptic message about how Tesla and the SpaceX CEO is working on a new master plan for the automotive company. Back in 2006, Musk wrote on the company's blog his first master plan. The secret, but public, plan was summarized at the bottom of the post in this way. Build sports car. Use that money to build an affordable car. Use that money to build an even more affordable car. While doing the above, also provide zero-emission electric power generation options, and don't tell anyone. Kim added that since then, the company has mainly stuck to the plan, releasing the premium Model S and Model X cars to help pave the way for the more affordable Model 3. While the last bit of the plan about not telling anyone seems to have been ignored, Tesla's first master plan can be seen largely as a success. Then, 3 days later, an article by Nikolaus Heinz on the same website reported Tesla as changing its mission from sustainable transportation to sustainable energy. With the Model 3 now coming out, Musk's vision from 2006 is complete. Now Musk seems intent to take this vision even further. From the company website, there is only a change in one word, from transport to energy, but the vision remains the same. According to Heinz, this small but noticeable change suggests that Musk is preparing a clean future for us all beyond just cars. Two more articles on the same website posted on July 12th are reporting Musk as announcing that Tesla plans to unveil both buses and trucks in 2017. According to the Tesla website, Master Plan Part 2 being the French word for the number 2, Part 2 reads as follows. Create stunning solar roofs with seamlessly integrated battery storage. Expand the electric vehicle product line to address all major segments. Develop a self-driving capability that is 10 times safer than manual via massive fleet learning. And enable your car to make money for you when you are not using it. The vision sounds very promising, and it is a vision that very directly competes head-to-head with the current paradigm of the global cabal. Musk likely would not have been able to succeed at all if this cabal still had the kind of control it once had. It is important to keep in mind, however, that Musk is operating with technologies that are on the cutting edge, but may not necessarily be a part of the still suppressed group of technologies that are being kept from humanity. The technology is already coming out for cars that are able to operate both on roads and in the air, and this will also shape the future of transportation as we currently know it. Last week, CVN reported that 2 Russian scientists had perfected the ability to transmute other elements, such as copper and lead, into gold. It will be interesting to see if Russia allows this information to become open source and made available to the people of the world in an attempt to shut down the financial power of the global cabal. As an announcement for this week, I just want to let everyone know that I will be taking time off from the newscast until the end of August. I laugh as I write this because the rate at which global events are now happening means I probably will not get to have that much time off. If there are significant events unfolding, I may consider doing a very short newscast, or I may post a weekly show summary of important links without necessarily recording a broadcast. My mental and physical health is taking a beating right now, and I'm finding it hard to focus on what needs to be done at this time due to the fact that I'm feeling very burnt out. It had been my hope that I could hang on until maybe mid-August before taking some time off, but I'm now accepting that this just is not possible. I need a break, and I need it right now. Those who are following the Cosmic Vision News homepage will be informed if I choose to do a broadcast or post valuable links from each week. I will post information on my personal Facebook page and the CVN Facebook page, and the website itself will be updated, of course, but I may not update any other of the social media. So, for now, unless something happens, CVN will be back on the air on September the 2nd. In this week's final words, as I mentioned at the beginning of the newscast, it is becoming more and more my belief and feeling that there is a plan of information and disinformation to desensitize people to the unfolding of global events so people won't overreact as the global changes occur. This is making all journalism, be it mainstream-controlled or alternative, very difficult. The mainstream-controlled journalism will try to sell its agenda in 2 to 5 minute stories that have been edited to fit into a designated time slot filled with commercials to pay for their operations and agenda marketing. Other sources will focus on one single topic and conduct an in-depth or more extensive interview with one guest or more to give people a more in-depth interpretation of various stories, whether they are mainstream-controlled or alternative news. The challenge, as I've been trying to share with listeners, is that the news is simply no longer the news. It is no longer a single story that can be reported on its own. As we are coming to learn more and more, a very simple story, even a story that doesn't deserve to be on a national newscast, can have a very complicated agenda behind it. Events are interconnected in ways that are mind-blowing to people who are only beginning to see and question the bigger picture of what is happening. I might add that this is only the bigger picture, and these same people may not even have touched questions relating to the bigger picture of what all these events may mean for the shift underway in human and planetary consciousness at this time. We have this small group I call the global cabal that has controlled the direction of this planet and enslaved humanity in the process for our entire lives and indeed much longer. This group has many smaller subgroups such as banking, military, media, education, oil, medicine, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, religion, legal, and more. Each of these subgroups are controlled by the larger group, and in turn, the main controllers of the subgroups have their own subgroups within subgroups that have compartmentalized our global society. For those who may not fully understand what I mean by this, I will use the analogy of those who were part of the Manhattan Project, the project that built the atomic weapon. At its peak, the project had employed over 125,000 people. 99% of those people, including the managers, had no idea what they were contributing to. They were doing something important, they may have known that, and they were likely told that it would contribute to global peace, but they were also not likely told what the definition of global peace was. Even today, as I have revealed in my master's thesis for peace education, there is currently no broadly accepted holistic definition for the word peace. Therefore, those at the very top of the Manhattan Project knew what was being built and what it would be used for, and that it would contribute to what their definition of peace was: a world enslaved to their agenda without any ability to question or resist it. Our global society has become compartmentalized in much the same way, and this includes journalism, religion, banking, the legal system, and other subgroups I mentioned earlier. People of the West are sold the message about how bad the conditions are for people living in the East. The people of the East are sold the message of how great things are, apparently, in the West. Yet the middle class in the U.S. and perhaps even Canada to some degree, and other Western countries too, has been destroyed by industries moving to the East to exploit their labor. Companies cheated employees in the West. Unions rose up to challenge this, and many within union leadership roles became equally corrupted in the process, especially in the U.S. and Canada. Companies shut down and moved overseas, and everyone ended up losing. This, however, was okay for the people who were in control, because the unemployed, the poor, the homeless, and the sick had been disempowered to the point where they could not resist, and even if they did, banks would threaten to take away their house, or the legal system would threaten to put them in jail, or make them pay a fine they could not afford, or the police would give them unlawful tickets, which are commercial agreements they did not consent to. Therefore, everyone was under control, and they were forced to focus only on their small part of survival, and if this meant building something that would later be used to harm humanity and the planet, so be it. I can imagine that the employees of Monsanto were all told that the products they would be making would bring great things to the planet, yet only now are we beginning to see what their definition of great things really is. However, coming back more specifically to what is happening at this time, we are witnessing changes on multiple levels, and on any given day, a leader or a country might say or do something that appears to show a movement towards helping humanity and the planet, and then on the very next day, those same leaders may say or do something else that supports the agenda of the global cabal. Most people do not understand this, and even at times I have trouble understanding this. It makes my job infinitely more complicated in trying to bring to you information that you can use to see that positive change is happening in the world right now, and it is happening quickly, even if one is unable to see the positive in what is currently unfolding. We look at all the shootings, and to someone who is unaware, he or she is very likely going to judge the event for what it is: a racially motivated event targeted at one or more unfortunate participants. People will blame the police. The police, becoming more fearful for their lives, have welcomed more militaristic training from groups such as Israel's Mossad. Taxpayers are billed for the increased militarization of forces that will ultimately be used against them. Society is conditioned to fear police, and the police are conditioned to fear society. In their anger and in their responses of fear, neither group has yet been able to fully understand that there are forces higher up than both of them who are pulling the strings to turn people against police and vice versa, so that a justification can be made for more taxpayer spending that will enslave and control the people, while also justifying the right of the state to strip people of their rights, freedoms, and yes, even their weapons for self-defense against a corrupted police state. We are distracted by the endless shootings going on now, the farce of the Republican convention in the U.S., the scandals involving Hillary Clinton, the manufactured refugee crisis across Europe, the unrest in France, Brexit, stock market crashes, prices of gold, silver, and so on. At the end of that, what many are primarily concerned with is the status of their pension plans and their personal security. They don't really care what may be going on elsewhere as long as they know that they will have enough to survive in a world where very few will have enough to survive. The global banking system was built and designed to exist on scarcity, on debt, on money created out of thin air. It is protected by a commercial system of rules that have been given the force of law. People are bought off, knowingly or unknowingly, or they are threatened to serve interests that are not beneficial to humanity and the planet. In this scarcity, the people of Europe are waking up to the lies and frauds. The people of North America have not yet done so on a mass scale. On one day, Obama and the U.S. appear to be doing something great, and on another day, they are not. The same could be said about almost every other country and its leader. We hear news that Russia and China are building a new financial system to replace the dying U.S. dollar, and yet in a next story, we hear about the same countries wanting to build up their militaries and prepare for the possibility of nuclear war. Those who are very familiar with the disclosure of ETs will know that there are sources who have witnessed the shutting down of nuclear facilities by entities beyond Earth. It is my belief that there are both positive and negative factions within many of the subgroups I named earlier, including the government and militaries worldwide. We're getting the output of both groups attempting to compete for the public opinion of what is going on. Perhaps we are being fed the good and the bad of various governments so that people may become more desensitized to all that is going on. In this way, perhaps we won't pay so much attention to the global cabal. The good groups won't care if you are paying attention because they're going to do what they do anyway. The global cabal, however, requires your attention and your energy in order for them to maintain their control. If you are not paying attention and not giving them the energy they need, they will cease to exist. Observing without judgment and reflecting on one's own path at this time is key, and the global changes will unfold as more and more anchor and hold a higher vision of peace, health, and abundance for all on a pristine, clean planet Earth. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, available also on the website. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, Scene page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that if you want to know where your heart is, look to where your mind goes when it wanders. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your heart, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.